As one of the most iconic fighting game sequels, Capcom vs SNK 2 is known the world over for its timeless aesthetics and gameplay mechanics. For a game this old, it's seriously impressive that CVS2 is still being enjoyed by both casual and competitive crowds, so that got me thinking, whatever happened to the first Capcom vs SNK? From being a mainstay at old-school fighting game events, to being featured in the Capcom Fighting Collection 2 with rollback netcode, one would assume that CVS1 enjoys the same popularity as its sequel. However, this simply isn't the case, so I wanted to investigate why. Why exactly is CVS1 often forgotten by those outside of the FGC's most hardcore legion? To clarify, I'm not saying that no one plays it, it's an official side game at Majors after all, but it's definitely fallen into its younger brother's shadow. By the way, please don't think that I hate CVS1 and want to see it burn in the pits of heck or anything like that, as I actually think it's pretty fun and super creative. Get ready to examine what should have been a smash hit, one that united the fighting game space's fiercest rivals. For those uninitiated, CVS2 provides players with 6 sets of system mechanics, or grooves, to choose from. As all 6 are based on distinct fighting games from both companies' catalogs, users are expected to utilize the groove's unique offerings in ways that personalize their playstyle. On a surface level, they might seem like fun gimmicks that provide some new strategies here and there, but in reality, the game depth they provide goes far deeper than that. Basic tools like air blocking, dashing, short hops, just defend, parries, alpha counters, multiple super levels, etc. are locked behind specific grooves, encouraging players to not only find what works best for their characters, but also for themselves. By taking every possible team and groove combination into account, that leaves us with over 1 million to choose from, and I think it goes without saying that this leads to near endless player creativity. On the other hand, CVS1 contains only 2 grooves. Incorporating wildly different gameplay styles in one title was a great innovation, albeit one that has since been outclassed in terms of quantity. The Capcom grooves multiple bars of meter, damage boosts, and level 3 supers, and the SNK grooves meter charging, infinite low health level 1 supers, and super desperation moves are really fun to use. But they can all be found in CVS2's C and S grooves respectively. Because of this, I can't think of a way for CVS1 grooves to provide a superior, or even different, interactive experience than what its sequel provides. Experimenting with the prequel's restricted groove selection after pouring hours into CVS2's mechanics resulted in some heavy tonal whiplash for me, and they feel more like a prototype for something far greater. In hindsight, this is exactly what the mechanic turned out to be, limited options and all. Those system mechanics I mentioned before, yeah, many of them just don't appear in CVS1, with the likes of short hops, just defends, and alpha counters being MIA, just to name a few. Super jumps, rolling, and delayed wake-ups are all we have to play around with here. With that said, I can't in good conscience claim this is an objective weakness of the game, as criticizing an older fighter for containing less systems than its direct continuation would be pretty disingenuous. However, I do believe that it contributes towards a more formulaic gameplay loop, and therefore, a reduced player count. Characters and players having fewer tools will always limit the number of outcomes in any given situation, preventing the series' absurd creativity from shining in the first game. That's not to say that CVS1's battle mechanics or character roster fail to bring about engaging interactions, just that they don't provide anything you can't get from its younger brother. Also, the game's combination of an SNK-inspired 4-button layout and Capcom-styled moment-to-moment gameplay failed to satiate the demands of either fanbase. For Street Fighter fans, the game's lack of medium buttons and team-based format made it feel too much like the King of Fighters, whereas SNK fans felt that their favorite groove and characters were noticeably inferior to the Capcom side. An old FAQ written by James Chen confirms as such, even going as far as to say that Capcom vs SNK was a mere shell of what it really could be. Despite Capcom's best efforts, their hot new fighter was viewed by many as a failed experiment, one plagued by a myriad of issues. With a title like Capcom vs SNK, I wouldn't blame fighting game fans for expecting a more varied character roster, especially after reading early details from game magazines. Edge Magazine's 78th issue claimed that Mega Man and Leon S. Kennedy would join the battle, playing into the underlying concept of these two companies colliding, not just their fighting game characters. Unfortunately, the only non-Street Fighter combatant is Darkstalker's Morrigan, with SNK's portion being entirely composed of the King of Fighters representatives. Compared to Capcom's other crossover titles around the same time that would often feature oddballs who had never appeared in a fighting game before, CVS1's roster was considerably more predictable. What I find kind of funny is that game footage from Power Stone, Rival Schools, Resident Evil, and what I assume is 1943 The Battle of Midway can all be seen behind the Groove Select UI, but none of its characters ended up being playable. Conversely, CVS2 included fighters from Rival Schools, Final Fight, The Last Blade, and Garou Mark of the Wolves, in addition to the usual Street Fighter and KOF fare. Like with the aforementioned grooves and system mechanics, the character selections are simply outclassed by that of its successor. Unlike, say, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and 3, where the rosters were to be distinct from one another, CVS2 focuses more on directly expanding what came before it. Due to this, every fighter from the first game returns, along with a bunch of newcomers too. I would argue that most players looking to jump into the world of Capcom vs SNK would notice that CVS2 has a larger offering of fighters and choose to play that instead. On the contrary, CVS1's strict ratio choices are completely different to the more freeform system found in the sequel. If you aren't aware, every character is worth between 1 to 4 points based on their health values and damage output, with the goal being to make a team that costs exactly 4, no more, no less. In CVS2, you're allowed to choose how many points each fighter costs, although one of them has to be at least ratio 2. For example, if I want a team of 3 with my ratio 2 at the end, that works perfectly. 2 ratio 2s, a ratio 3 and 1, or even a singular ratio 4 work without restrictions too, meaning that you can customize your team's head count and power levels however you want. It's truly up to you. Heading back to CVS1 reveals strict ratios where characters are locked into one of 4 categories. Outside of the game's home port, it's impossible to alter these numbers, so if you want to play as Cammy for instance, with the capacity of a ratio 3 fighter, you're out of luck, she's permanently stuck in ratio 1. The idea was to make the player choose between a large yet weak team or a strong yet small team. Personally, I don't think this take on the ratio system is inherently bad, but I do feel that it's pretty arbitrary, and I have no idea how Capcom decided who went where. Did they intentionally design the ratio 1 fighters to be weak? Well, EVO 2025 champion Dr. B considers ratio 1 Sakura and Blanca as high tiers in CVS1 Pro. In the original version, Nakaruru is a mere ratio 2 fighter, although she ended up being the best character in the game. The bottom line is that the rigid nature of CVS1's ratios lacks internal consistency, as well as CVS2's strong sense of player agency. Pitting 2 teams of varying sizes against each other is quite the novel concept, but for reasons we'll cover soon, this turned out to be very unwise. And by soon, I mean now. It's no secret that CVS2's high-level competition is dominated by Cammy, Sagat, Blanca, and Bison, Sakura, etc., with the first game having its own share of top-tier shenanigans. Thanks to it being older than I am, researching the minutiae of CVS1's roster isn't the easiest thing in the world, although there are some interesting quirks that I was able to find in old forums. Ken can juggle his light DP into a super, Ryu can link his sweep into Shin Shoryuken, Sakura's DP can link from light normals and allows for juggles, which is crazy for a ratio 1 fighter, along with EX Balrog, Guile, Dhalsim, and EX Yuri all being top tier. This might sound really cool, but upon closer inspection, we start to see the ratio system rearing its ugly head again. Way back in the early days, when the Western FGC began to figure out the meta, almost every player realized that an all-ratio 1 team with 4 fighters per player was the most optimal choice. As some of them were even stronger than their ratio 2 and 3 counterparts, it was a no-brainer to gain their high power levels while saving on points. Plus, you don't want to have fewer fighters than your opponent, right? Because us Westerners will proudly exploit any fighting game strategy to win,
Time to learn! You gonna learn today!
it didn't take long for this mindset to become the competitive standard, resulting in battles with 8 characters.
I like this pick better. I think it's better to use ratio 1, ratio 2 characters. Ratio 3, it's much more valuable having these ratio 1 characters. The damage is good enough.
This means that at the bare minimum, you would have games with 4 rounds, and if it really went down to the wire, a single game could have 7 rounds. That's right, 7 rounds in one game. To say that CVS1 was defined by slow pacing would be an understatement, as some of these sets make snails look like Sonic the Hedgehog. To be real with you, I don't blame the players for adopting this style at all. I mean, you gotta do whatever you can to win a tournament. In an article published by Polygon, Seth Killian labeled CVS1 as not a bad game, but its slow, low-stakes style created a black hole where hype went to die. Ouch, that's harsh. He mentions how many of its options were weak and failed to provide any real alternatives to this long-winded approach. That's not to say that everybody was using this formula, as you can find plenty of modern footage where players will opt for a 2 or 3 character team, just that it was prevalent enough in the West to have a meaningful influence on how the game was initially played. Now, I'm not going to tell you that CVS2 is known for its breakneck speed or anything like that, and as someone who has run the game at majors, I know firsthand just how long it can take to finish up a bracket. But on the bright side, at least it caps out at teams of 3. You could argue that preventing the user from selecting a stacked 4-man team limits their creativity, but with how this was a direct criticism of CVS1, I believe Capcom was right to include this limitation. Not once during my research did I find a single player claiming they preferred the old meta and pacing over what CVS2 brought to the table. The soundtrack, presentation, and general aesthetic? People still love those to bits. I love those to bits. Man, are these cutscenes cool. But the time it can take to finish one game in a first to 2 format? Yeah, I think I'll stick with the sequel. For those unconcerned with the logistics of running a tournament and staying on schedule, lengthy pacing may not be a detriment at all, so you should get out there and kick some butt with ratio 1 fighters. Because of everything we've covered so far, it should come as no surprise that CVS1 never really took off in the way Capcom hoped it would. CVS2 releasing a year later didn't help either, but even if that game never existed, I still think that the original would have remained very niche for a variety of reasons. The declining popularity of arcades, lack of arcade-perfect home console ports, and unstable online play made it tough to be a fighting game fan in the early 2000s, with some calling this period the fighting game Dark Ages. Melodramatic naming aside, it couldn't be denied that the genre was no longer the Capcom-driven mainstream spectacle it once was. Thanks to brand overexposure and a decision to stick with 2D sprite art in a 3D-dominated landscape, the sales of their fighting games paled in comparison to their other works, including CVS1. When Street Fighter III New Generation hit the arcades in 1996, it sold an estimated 300 units in America, making it one of the biggest financial bombs in Capcom's history. Unfortunately, CVS1 sold 400 units. If you were an arcade goer back in 2000, Capcom vs SNK wouldn't have looked that different from what the two studios had already released. Sure, it's cool to see Chun-Li and Mai in the same game, but was it that different from what you had already played or even owned at home? For many, I assume the answer was no, persuading them to put their money into other machines. According to Takashi Nishiyama, the Capcom vs SNK franchise was internally expected to capture the entire Street Fighter and KOF fanbases, urging both groups to unify under this one game. By the time he realized that such a goal was too ambitious for its own good, the game had already been shipped and failed to reach Capcom's lofty expectations. Thanks to its update, Capcom vs SNK Pro, being arcade imperfect on the PS1 and Japanese exclusive on the Dreamcast, getting your hands on the first version of the game without the new balance changes was quite challenging. Unlike how the Capcom Fighting Collection 2 lets you switch between original and EO CVS2, CVS Pro is the only version found within the compilation, preventing its most hardcore fans from reliving vanilla CVS1 on modern consoles. Originally, my plan for this moment in the script was to mention how a lack of initial popularity was the reason behind the game's relative obscurity within the current era, but then I remembered Third Strike. Released a year before CVS1, 3S is known for being an update to a game that didn't sell very well, which itself was a continuation of a failed sequel. In spite of this, it's gone on to become one of the most celebrated 90s fighting games, one that's still being actively enjoyed today. If we're looking at it strictly through the lens of today's day and age, why has this game usurped its sequel while Capcom vs SNK is outshined by CVS2? There are plenty of reasons, but the one that sticks out to me the most is how CVS1 is the new generation of Capcom vs SNK. Think about it this way, Third Strike is the be-all and end-all of that particular sub-series. There are countless differences between New Generation and Second Impact, but 3S's larger roster and refined mechanics provide the definitive Street Fighter 3 experience, with this concept perfectly applying to CVS2. From its updated character lineup to the 6-button layout, every one of its qualities was deemed a massive improvement by those who were devoted to Capcom fighters. It isn't perfect, but in terms of demonstrating just how wild these universes can be once they collide, Capcom vs SNK 2 is the gold standard. I've been playing CVS1 recently in my spare time, and upon realizing that it's been a while since I've made one of these video essays, I thought I would combine the two concepts for my next project. Again, the purpose of this video was not to trash the game and persuade you to throw it in the bin. In fact, my enjoyment of watching competitive footage got me thinking about the how and why behind the game's limited popularity. Researching the story behind Capcom vs SNK was good fun, and I had a great time articulating my thoughts in a more formal style than usual. Although I do prefer the sequels, CVS1 is truly entertaining when you're dicking around with friends, so much so that I even prefer it over some modern fighters. Before we wrap up, I urge you to try the game out for yourself if the opportunity ever arises. There's something about the movement and combo structure that keeps me coming back, even if I can't quite put my finger on it. Also, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you like the game? Do you hate it? Do you think it's the best thing since sliced bread? Okay, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you and your time, and I hope you had fun. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.